some of them would say, my wife is mad at me because I'm always on my phone. And she'd look over and say, what are you doing? And he says, I'm doing OR Ninja. Another one said, this is kind of addictive. This is kind of fun, which to me was almost moving because I had this idea to build something, and then you have this person who's out there using it and enjoying it and benefiting from it.
Rising above the buzz of ultrasonic cleaners and the clanking of stainless steel are the ideas and voices that are changing an industry. You're listening to the Beyond Clean podcast, the central nexus for the people, processes, and products that are improving our sterile processing world. Each week, we speak with frontline technicians, CEOs, engineers, and entrepreneurs with a common goal: to help you fight dirty, every instrument, every time. Whether you're tuning in for education or inspiration, we're glad you did. Now turn on those washers and turn up the volume. It's time to go beyond clean.
Hey there, Sterile Processing Universe. Welcome to Season 27 of Beyond Clean. This season is known as Planet Surgery, and we're going to be talking to all kinds of awesome folks about what's happening in that OR room. So we're kind of talking about the time the patient rolls in, or maybe the instruments roll in, to the time the instruments roll out. And we're going to try to keep our focus there, talk about all the implications inside and outside, but that have impact on that room. Joining us this season, the one, the only Bobby Parker. Welcome back to the podcast, sir. We missed you last season. I guess you were there a little bit last season, but we missed you, man. It's good to have you back.
Yeah, thanks, Hank. It is good to be back. And particularly on this season, I don't know how much you've teased the lineup out there on the LinkedIn pages, but yeah, we've got some really different kind of topics to be talking about this year. Everything that's going to touch and involve sterile processing for sure, but maybe broadening the horizons a little bit, talking about some topics that maybe the average SPD tech doesn't spend a whole lot of time thinking about. So I think it's going to be an exciting season.
And on today's episode, we're going to talk about the concept of gamification. This may be a new concept for some folks, but just hold your horses. If you're not like a big gamer, right? We've got the gamer chair or the gamer controllers, or the gamer mic thing, right? If that's not you.
You sound like you know exactly what you're talking about.
I mean, I've just seen some pictures, okay? But if that's not you, hang with us, because gamification is about more than that. It actually goes to what's called dopamine and the responses that humans have to that and how we learn. And I think no matter where you are in this equation, we all want our clinicians to know more. So that's what we're going to talk to Dr. Eric Price today, the founder of OR Ninja, an orthopedic surgeon in sports medicine. So we'll have Dr. Price with us in the studio in just a moment. So hang with us, and we'll be right back after a short break.
From the studios of Healthcare HQ, you're listening to Beyond Clean, the global voice of sterile processing.
All right, Sterile Process Universe, we are in studio now with Dr. Eric Price, orthopedic surgeon in sports medicine and founder of OR Ninja. And you're going to learn a lot more about what that technology is and the context it is playing in clinical education in the perioperative space. Dr. Price, welcome to the podcast with us today.
Yes, thank you very much, Hank. I'm very honored to be here. Thanks for having me.
So some of my best guests, some of my favorite guests, we'll put it that way, are the ones that I just happen to stumble across through LinkedIn. And you're a great example of that. I don't necessarily remember what post it was or where we came in contact, but I saw you talking about something. Maybe you saw me talking about something I don't remember. And then I was like, okay, I got to talk to this guy because this sounds really interesting. So before we get into all the topics at hand here, just give a little bit more background about who you are and your journey toward this OR Ninja creation and launch.
Well, I'm an orthopedic surgeon on Long Island, New York. My specialty is sports medicine. I've been in practice for about 20 years, and my interest in education began when I was a resident, because I realized quickly that there weren't a lot of great resources for us when we entered the operating room. And so I realized quickly that I didn't know the names of a lot of the instruments, because the only time that we had access to the instruments was in the operating room. So I started calling them made up silly names that still stick today. And I'm embarrassed that I don't know the names of half of the instruments on a small fragment tray, but I could still do an ankle fracture. And the other problem was learning the steps in the case. We didn't have a lot of resources available for us to figure out what was next. And it was really just learning on the fly. And I quickly realized that there was a problem with what they were putting in front of us when we were going through our educational journey. So I started getting creative in solving the problem myself by writing my own surgical technique guides, taking a digital camera into the operating room, writing down all the steps of the case, and then being much more comfortable in a high stress situation with somewhat difficult surgeons, wanting to know that I knew what was next, and then not knowing it, feeling like an idiot, and then going home and then studying this little thing that I made. And so then I was able to survive some of my more difficult rotations by getting creative with creating my own surgeon specific technique guides. And so that came and went, and fast forward into when I'm in practice, and I realized that the sales reps who came into my operating room often had this look of terror. They just looked at me like, please don't kill me. And it was quickly evident that they all had something in common. They're all just undertrained. They were kind of thrown in, and they would follow someone around. And then next thing you know, there'd be a new rep because the one who was thrown in just couldn't handle the learning in the lion's den kind of scenario. So I started having these conversations with the sales reps. I'd say, hey, listen, it's pretty clear that you're new. What do you want to know? Let's just talk. I'm going to do a rotator cuff repair. Ask me anything. Let's make sure that your time is spent valuably. If you don't know what you're looking at, there's no such thing as a stupid question. Let's go. So I'd say, okay, here's where the portals are. Here's why I'm putting the camera here. Here's the rotator cuff, greater tuberosity, and here's your anchor, and here's why I like it, and here's why your competitor is not as good, and here's why your competitor is better, and so on. And I found that I was having this conversation over and over, and I realized, wait a minute, I had the same problem when I was a resident, and the two main problems that I encountered with people who came in the OR, and that was also with scrub techs and first assists, PAs, whomever, was that there is a problem with access to instruments, meaning the medical device companies can't take these instruments out of circulation because they need to be in the OR. So they have to spend 7 figures to get them out of circulation or give the reps access. So they can't learn. I had the same problem. And then the workflow, the what's next. If I call for a certain instrument, it's like a dance. I call for instrument X, Y, Z, A, B, and C are going to follow every time. And the sales reps who do the best jobs are the ones who can put the instrument in the scrub tech's hand before I need it. But you can't learn that workflow unless you're in the OR and you get your 10,000 hours. And so that was the bottleneck. So I started asking them, well, how do you train? And they'd say, well, we have all these modules. We have PowerPoint, we have video, and I follow around my boss and so on. I said, but you still don't seem to be comfortable. So what do? I use Google. So I scratch my head and I say, wait a minute, you work for a multi-billion-dollar medical device manufacturer and you're just asking Siri what's next and YouTubing things, and that seems like a problem. So I realized quickly that I had to go and learn more about how modern students learn, because they all seem to dislike the death by PowerPoint approach to learning. And so my partner and I, his name is David Zaret, he's an orthopedic surgeon that I work with who's a foot and ankle specialist, put our heads together and said, let's figure out how we can improve the way that these new hires are learning. So we created this app called OR Ninja, and it's a mobile first, gamified, micro lesson based app that helps teach the language of orthopedics, the language of medicine, because medical people and non-medical people have a significant disparity in the amount their vocabulary. A non-medical person has a 10,000 word vocabulary. A medical person has a 30,000 word vocabulary. So they're taking these people who are trying to sell a product and putting them in the operating room, but they don't give them enough resources to speak the language.
I just had a question on the gamification piece. Obviously, your experience in trying to rescue yourself from the difficulties of residency and the difficult surgeons, like, your answer to that was, it's kind of like, death by PowerPoint a little bit, because you're making your own PowerPoint kind of technique guides and workflows. And then you come, though, to this point to where you decide that's actually not maybe the scalable solution to solve this, or maybe the most accessible or acceptable in the current generation or future generations of, representatives or even other OR personnel, like you said, from scrub techs and whatnot. So what about gamification in particular? Like, did you have experience with games outside of the working environment, or like, what about this one methodology kind of caught your attention?
So I have 4 children, and watching the way that they're educated versus the way that I was educated is a whole different experience. Perfect example was a Saturday, and it was a sunny day out, and my son is on the computer, and I said, "Hey, let's go outside." And he's like, "No. I said, "No, we're good. We have enough screen time." And I said, "Well, it's beautiful out. Let's go play." And he said, "No. I'm doing math." And I said, "Wait a minute. You're doing math. What's happening?" And he's got this little game where one fish has a number 2 and another fish has a number 3, and they're playing this game where they got to eat the bubbles. And it's basically just this little Jedi mind trick that some educator came up with to make math fun so that he would prefer to play the game versus go outside. And then I realized, wait a minute, this is a whole different way that modern learners are learning. And then one time we went on vacation somewhere, and one of my sons was talking to a child that he met, and he realized that this kid was fluent in 3 languages. So he said, "I want to go learn a language." So he came home and we found Duolingo. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard of Duolingo, but it's the world's leading language app. And I started looking at it and saying, wait a minute, medicine is a language. Let me learn more about this. So that's when I started really self-educating about gamification. And so I realized quickly that gamification employs points, badges, streaks, and leaderboards. These are all game elements that are designed to make you engage with something that you might not engage with. That's a little boring, like something you have to learn for work, or that's somewhat interesting, but they want to get you more engaged. And gamification works incredibly well. The reason that it works well is because every time you have one of these game elements involved, you get a little micro hit of dopamine. And dopamine is the neurotransmitter that is the pleasure neurotransmitter. And after a while, you can get basically conditioned to do whatever action it is that's going to get you that little bit of dopamine. And then if you've ever opened up your phone to check your messages and then find yourself on LinkedIn or Instagram and you didn't even know how you got there, it's because you've performed that action enough times that your brain realizes, oh my God, I got some dopamine from this. This was amazing. Let's do that again. And so I quickly learned about the use of game elements in education, watched it happen on Duolingo, watched it happen with my kids, and then I said, well, wait a minute. How can we transform the onboarding process and teach the language of instrumentation and teach the surgical workflow in a fun, mobile-first way that people are interested in instead of get frustrated with because it's too passive, like a PowerPoint?
Right. That makes a lot of sense. And Dr. Price, gamification is not a new concept, right? It's been around, as you alluded to. And yet it seems like in healthcare, we've been very slow to adopt innovative ideas like that. I mean, certainly the experience you mentioned being a resident and having to learn all these instruments and making up crazy names for it, that lines up with our experience from sterile processing, getting phone calls for lobster claws and sweethearts and Ricky Bobbies and all kinds of crazy instrument names, right? So there's definitely a learning curve to be had there. I'm curious, why do you think healthcare has been so slow to adopt innovative gamification, edutainment type education for healthcare providers?
That's a great question, Bobby, and it's one that's puzzled me, and I've thought about it a lot. I think that typically people in medicine are late adopters. We're not Silicon Valley who moves fast and breaks things, because moving fast and breaking things usually has implications on, the well-being and health of the person that you're taking care of or operating on. And so we're very, very cautious when it comes to, hey, let's try this new X, Y, and Z sort of, maybe it's a procedure or a medicine. And I think that caution is also applied to tech. And even though it's not fun, it's not sticky, it's not mobile first half the time, the method that they use to teach still works kind of good enough. So they feel like, okay, well, we can teach you enough, put you in the field, and you'll be fine. When in reality, it's not good enough. But I think it's because we typically in medicine are very skeptical about anything new.
Sure. So in many ways, you probably feel like you're pioneering a new way forward here, trying to solve a problem that obviously exists in the OR. I'm curious, as you've been going on this journey with trying to change education, particularly for your sales reps in orthopedic ORs, how effective have you seen the shift towards gamification? Do you have any comparisons to maybe some that you've brought on through this process? And obviously we can't be too product specific. We're doing an educational show today, but I'm curious how well it's working.
Well, qualitatively and quantitatively, I can speak to those one at a time. Every single sales rep that I've ever shown this to, save a few, has said to me, I wish I had this when I was onboarding and training. Where was this when I was starting? And it's really just, I show them one screenshot and they get it right away. Because anyone who's ever put on a set of scrubs, regardless of your station in the operating room, if you're in central sterile or you're the first assist or you're the surgeon, it doesn't matter. You've all had that moment of panic because you didn't know what the instrument was or what the next step was. So they look at it and they say, oh my God, this is amazing. We recently had an engagement with one of the largest orthopedic medical device manufacturers. And they said, listen, we are going to teach our new hires the total shoulder system that we're launching. And we're going to give this group of new hires access to the app 8 weeks prior to in-person training, alongside the traditional means that we use, PowerPoints, videos, modules. And we're just going to see how they perform. Well, just a few weeks ago, David Zaret and I had the pleasure and honor of traveling to their headquarters and meeting these trainees. And I'll tell you, it was an incredible, enlightening experience. First of all, we launched, and right away, it was just like watching the stock market or watching a race or watching a movie. Because the first day we launched, within 2 hours, one of the sales reps completed the whole thing. And I was like, oh my God, who is this guy? So I found him on LinkedIn. I connected with him and I said, you're a rock star. What's going on? And he said, oh, it was fun. And I don't know about you, but I've never ever watched a PowerPoint or a video and said that was fun. I'm going to devote 2 hours of my Friday night to doing this entire thing. So fast forward to, the end result. One of the game elements that we employed was a contest, very simple, leaderboard. Leaderboards are incredibly powerful. They work on Peloton. They worked for me on Peloton an hour ago. I woke up, I didn't really want to do it, and then I had to finish first, and it worked. It worked for this. So they said whoever scores the highest at the end of this period wins. And it was pretty unclear. Maybe it's a sweatshirt, maybe it's who knows. Well, that was so incredibly powerful because the two people who were neck and neck scored 190,000 points. Each level only has 120 points. They essentially spent 26 hours on this app each, more than a day of their life, just because they wanted to win. Now, keep in mind, they had 90 hours of work on top of this app. This app was somewhat optional, so they did a third more work than everyone else. And when we met them in person, they gave us a hug. Like, hey, man, I'm not kidding. We bumped into each other at their headquarters, and we knew each other from LinkedIn, and they walked over and they gave me a hug. And I couldn't believe it. And they said, thank you for building that. That was amazing. I wish everything else was like that. So we had an hour sit down with everyone, and they gave us a lot of feedback. And overall, they said, look, we enjoyed learning this way versus the traditional PowerPoint and video. Some of them would say, my wife is mad at me because I'm always on my phone. And she'd look over and say, what are you doing? And he says, I'm doing OR Ninja. Another one said, this is kind of addictive. This is kind of fun, which to me was almost moving because I had this idea to build something, and then you have this person who's out there using it and enjoying it and benefiting from it. Fast forward to the more quantitative results. The students who used OR Ninja had a significantly higher score in their post-training didactics and testing than those who did not. So we could prove that it worked with data, and we could also enjoy the positive feedback that we got from the students.
I want to ask you a question. Anytime we talk to innovators, especially in this kind of technology space, I always like to bring it to this clinical side, right? Like, you're a resident, you went on to become a surgeon. Well, I guess you're already a surgeon as a resident, but you went on to graduate. You decided to do both of these at once, to remain a clinician and also to be kind of a tech entrepreneur, right? How much of this gamification style approach to clinical ed is going to come from inside of healthcare, and how much of it is something that has to be built by someone else besides the nurse, the surgeon, the rep? And I think you're interestingly positioned because you straddle both worlds. So I'm curious your thought on that.
Well, it's a bit of both, but I think that I have a unique perspective because I've been in the field for 25 years, and I know all the pain points that I've experienced, and I can relate to the pain points that the other people in the operating room have or are experiencing. And in order to try and fix it, I just got frustrated, and I said, well, there's got to be a better way to have this sales rep support our case. So what can I learn from other industries? I'm not creating anything particularly novel. I'm just borrowing what Silicon Valley has figured out about 20 years ago. They did a great job of figuring out how to deliver micro hits of dopamine to the end user, whether it's through Instagram or LinkedIn or Snapchat. Those are just pass-throughs. Really, what they figured out is, how can I get the dopamine into their bloodstream so that they're having a nice time using my product? And they've made multi-billion-dollar companies doing so. And so I just said, hey, what are they doing that's making their workforce get more engaged and making their end users have fun doing whatever it is? And I tried to build that solution for the people who I knew were struggling. Basically, in a nutshell, I built what I wish I had when I was learning. And if I had had this when I was learning, it would have been a much easier experience with a lot less heartburn.
Mm-hmm. I guess one of the takeaways there, if I was to restate that, is you don't have to know everything there is to know about coding or app development or anything else. You've got to be either frustrated enough or passionate enough to take this problem that has yet to be solved, and then to have a little bit of that creativity to look outside of healthcare and see what is everybody else doing in other industries, if it's Silicon Valley or if it's something else, to say, now, is there something that we could do to bring that existing concepts and models in to solve our specific clinical problems? And I tend to agree that, this blend between the clinician as entrepreneur, I think it's a really, really powerful combination, not just because I put myself in a category too, but also because nobody can solve problems as good as the people who have personally experienced the nuances of those problems. And you know what I'm talking about, right? There's only so much you can get in a market research or kind of like a client interview to really understand their problems if you haven't walked a mile in the shoes, or 10,000 hours to your other point, and then have that creativity, that passion, and bring that kind of technology forward. I think that's really, really powerful. Let me ask you this. The broader impact of this, obviously, you're talking about equipping these reps, but we also mention there's other applications for understanding these tray setups and the instrument flows. Can you speak to the other clinical team members, or the potentiality, not even maybe just for your tech, But what else could we use gamification to do in the perioperative setting to bridge and to fill some of these knowledge gaps that are out there today?
Well, the first thing to do is to make things mobile first. And there are a lot of learning management systems and software solutions out there that are still desktop or laptop based. And that's a problem because mobile overtook that laptop in 2017 in terms of web traffic. And so we're just behind where people want to get information. The first thing to do is put it on their phone. Everyone's always got their phone. But a lot of the manufacturers will put their information on a laptop, and then there's downtime between surgeries. The turnover time can be 15 minutes, can be an hour and a half. We've all been there. And what these reps who used our platform said, hey, I just did a total shoulder. I stepped out of the case. I opened up OR Ninja, reviewed all the stuff, went into my next case. It was great. And the reason that's great is because the power of the mobile first and the game elements and so forth is that it really gets the user to have retention. In education, there's recall and there's retention. If you watch a video, maybe 30 minutes later, you're going to be able to recall the major points. But 3 weeks later, your retention is probably going to be 5-10%. But a lot of these reps would say to me, hey, this is pretty sticky. I remember everything. Instead of being spoken to, I'm engaging and interactive, and it's an interactive, and I have muscle memory because I have to move my thumb and drag this into the spot on the phone. So what I'm getting at is it needs to be on the phone because everyone's always got their phone, but the reps aren't bringing their laptops to the operating room to pull it up between cases and learn. They're just doing something else. So it's a missed opportunity if you don't give someone a platform on their preferred device. That's first. In terms of using game elements, a lot of companies will say that they're gamified, but a lot of the feedback we got from the educators at this major medical device manufacturer was they said, look, a lot of them say they're gamified, but they're really not. They're just a little boring, and they don't use these elements properly and leverage them to get the dopamine flowing, to get people to want to come back. So figuring out really what works for Instagram, what works for LinkedIn, and what works for other platforms, and baking that into your educational platform is a very good starting point.
Sure. As I'm thinking through this, Dr. Price, I guess if listeners could watch in studio right now and see the smiles and the head nods from Hank and I, like they'd be getting the feeling that we're very much attuned to what you're saying. And, edutainment, gamification's been part of what prompted Hank and Justin to start the Beyond Clean podcast, of trying to get education that's mobile, that's entertaining, that's interesting to listen to, that's different from what's out there. I'm also at the same time trying to think through what maybe some of the objections would be to adopting this kind of model of education. Obviously, not having significant knowledge gaps is really important in healthcare, and being in such a highly regulated environment and being able to show certificates. It seems like healthcare is just in love with their learning modules and their death by PowerPoint, because it's easy from a compliance perspective to make sure there aren't any knowledge gaps. I'm just curious from your perspective and the value that you place on gamification and trying to help improve the way that people learn, particularly in the healthcare space. Is there room for both? And what are maybe some of the things that the traditional models of education do better than a mobile app or a game?
I'd have to say that I don't know if there's a lot of things that the traditional models do better, because just observing again, my kids who are, from college to grammar school, they all reach for their phone to learn something. I asked my son, who plays guitar, do you want a laptop? He said, no, I can learn everything I want through my phone. And I watch him on an app that just teaches him how to play along to his favorite Metallica songs, and it's kind of amazing. And PowerPoint and these videos are so interchangeable. They all kind of bleed and blend together that they become kind of more background noise. So the beauty of the mobile first gamified platform is that you have these micro lessons that are 15 or 20 questions. You can do them in 2 to 3 to 4 minutes, while you're waiting in line for your coffee at Starbucks, and then you've gotten your little dopamine that you're looking for, you've gotten your education, and it's sticky. The other piece in terms of compliance and the data that you get from these PowerPoints and so forth, what I've come to learn is that the educators call the data that we provide invaluable, that they've not been able to harvest until in-person training. From what I understand, you get, if you deliver a PowerPoint to a trainee or a video, you just get a yes, no. Did they watch it? Did they not? Did they pass the requisite, questions? But how many times have you just watched a PowerPoint or a video, gone and done something else, and then let it run, and then come back and answer the 5 questions, and then say, I got it. And then anyone who says they haven't done that is I don't believe them. And so I would say that it's good because it says that someone participated in X, Y, or Z requirement. But if you have a gamified app such as ours, the data that you get, I know where someone's thumb went every time they touched the screen. So what would happen during this training period of 8 weeks prior to their in-person training is once a week I would see what everyone's getting right, what everyone's getting wrong. These are the most commonly confused instruments. These are the most commonly mistaken instruments. These are the most commonly answered correct instruments. And I would say, okay, everyone, here are these 4 lookalikes. And I'd put a 500-word thing together and I'd send it out to the group and I'd say, you guys shouldn't get tripped up by having these twins next to each other, because the 2 biggest problems in the OR, anyone who's ever loaded or touched a tray, is tray accuracy and instrument recognition. And we've all been involved in a scenario where you've asked for something and it's either absent, or you've asked for something and gotten something that it looks like. So my goal was to see what instruments people are getting right and wrong so that it's personalized training. So I can go to the workstation of a sales rep while they're in training, or a SPD employee while they're learning all the instruments, and I can say, these are the 10 instruments that you've gotten down perfectly. We're going to ignore these. But these are the 10 instruments that you're really struggling with. So we're going to make sure that when we're done talking, you never have to worry about not knowing what you're talking about. It's like Moneyball, that movie where they use data to drive the decisions about who they were going to draft for baseball. It's this data that tells you where the strengths and weaknesses of each individual user is, and also the macro data of this cohort of 40 people. These are the ones they know, these are the ones they don't. So we don't have to waste in-person training to talk to people, to tell people about what they already know. That's a lot of wasted money and time. Let's go and dive right into what you don't know. And we can use all of that data to figure out where their strengths and weaknesses are. You can also see who your power users are. You could quickly, it's just like a bell curve. Some people didn't touch our app, some people touched it a little bit, and there were power users who went bananas. And that's like a work ethic biopsy. That's an easy way to know these are the rock stars who are going to go out and perform the best. These are your future leaders. So let's make sure that, one, we really train them well so they want to sell well, and they stick around. We don't want to lose them to our competitor. Let's make sure that they feel like they're part of the family. And you don't know that until 6, 12, 18 months, until someone's been in the field, and then you get some complaints or some compliments. But I know this right away. Who's going to be strong and who is going to need a lot of help. So circling back to the information that you get, the data that we harvest has been incredibly valuable to make the educational process more efficient.
Yeah, and what leader wouldn't want that kind of customized, specific data around individual team members and how they're learning and being able to address knowledge gaps in a specific way like that? It definitely makes a lot of sense. You have gotten the gears in my head reeling and spinning about all the implications around education, particularly in the sterile processing world. In many ways, education and healthcare is like a room full of targets. You could pretty well throw a dart in any direction and find improvement, and hit your target. And so definitely a lot of implications around this concept of gamification and linking, kind of rather than fighting against the way that human biology is designed, trying to embrace that as we help people learn in the healthcare space. Great interview, Dr. Price. There are a lot more implications that we could dive into. Unfortunately, the time always goes by so quick. I have a feeling that we're going to get a lot of comments and questions on this episode around this topic, and maybe will be an opportunity to come back and talk about some of those other implications in surgery. So from Hank and I just want to say thanks for coming on the show and giving us such a great interview.
Well, Bobby and Hank, again, it's truly an honor. As you mentioned, connecting through LinkedIn or however we ended up crossing paths, it was, I had heard about Beyond Clean, and it was this mystical, you guys are like the Pope in this space, and to be invited to speak to the Pope, that's a high honor. Trust me.
Watch out. Tomorrow, Hank's LinkedIn post is going to be him wearing a Pope hat. So.
I was going to say something like, we both have very distinctive hats, but they're a little bit different. But yeah, Dr. Price, it is an honor, like Bobby said. And what's the best way if folks do have questions right off the bat for you? What's the best way for them to reach out to contact you?
Well, my email address would be drprice@orninja.com. So it's drprice@orninja.com.
All right, and that was Dr. Eric Price, orthopedic surgeon in sports medicine and founder of OR Ninja. Bobby, man, such a great conversation. I'm a fan of games. I don't have a game console at home, but I do have a cell phone, obviously, and there are some games on my cell phone. And so when he's talking about the dopamine hits, I understand that. It's weird. Out of everything on my phone, though, I don't get the dopamine hits from the games. It's LinkedIn. When I open LinkedIn, that's the hit for me.
Nobody is surprised to hear that. And I'm sure you're not surprised at the question I asked at the end about raising objections. I'm kind of a crusty old soul in many ways. And so I'm more of a minimalist when it comes to my phone. Like, I'm intentionally trying to avoid the apps that are going to try to reprogram my brain through dopamine, right? And so thinking about the implications of this, though, and not fighting against human nature, and at the very least, making learning something about healthcare engaging, fun, and something that you can do in your spare time, like on a phone. There's incredible value to that. So yeah, it was a great conversation for sure.
Kind of one part of the conversation, there's a lot that we didn't get to your point. Just the time always flies on these conversations, but I would have really liked to dig into the potential and the opportunity for clinicians in the department today, right? So let's think like department educators, maybe department leaders, even frontline technicians, quite frankly, who just see something they're like, oh, we need to solve this problem, but I don't want to wait, 5 or 10 years for some innovator to create this new gaming platform. Like, what can I do today that can leverage some of these gamification concepts to drive some change? And so I know there's people out there that love games and they understand these concepts, and there's people out there that are really techie and also clinicians. So I would hope, this episode spurs some of y'all on to doing something in your department and then talking about it so the rest of us can learn and, share this knowledge. Like, I love the actual tech and applications like this OR Ninja stuff that we talked about today, but I also know there's many more way more problems than one entrepreneur can solve, than one app can solve. We need everybody out there equipped, encouraged, passionate, or like Dr. Price said, frustrated enough to say, I'm going to do something about this and not wait for somebody else to. So if that's you, go out and do it, solve that problem, then tell the rest of us so that we can learn from you and continue fighting dirty better. That's going to do it for this episode. Welcome to season 27 of Planet Surgery. Hope you're enjoying yourself, but wait, there's more, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Beyond Clean. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing to Beyond Clean on your favorite podcast app, or by downloading the smartphone app on iPhone or Android. Simply search for Beyond Clean in the App Store or Google Play. The best thing about downloading the smartphone app is that you can access bonus content for certain episodes and view episodes in certain categories, like articles on the go and vendor spotlights. Are you following us on LinkedIn or Facebook yet? If you are and you love an episode or post, then let your social network know about it. Like, comment, or share our posts along with your thoughts and keep the conversation going. If you have any topics or guests that you would like to recommend for a future episode, just send us an email to info@beyondclean.net. We look forward to hearing from you.